Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Two Peas on a Podcast. This week, my buddy Nick and I will be discussing the new film Past Lives. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Two Peas on a Podcast is here. Gerald is here with you. And of course, my co-host, there he is, Nick. What's up, man?
Welcome to Two Fleas on a Dogcast. I'm Nick. Bow wow wow, yippee yo, yippee yay.
What was it last week? It was two bees on a hivecast?
Maybe.
And now it's two fleas on a dogcast. So is this going to be a thing every week?
Maybe.
How many things rhyme with peas, though? I guess we'll find out.
So many things. All you got to do is put an S on the end of a word.
I guess we'll find out. Well, all right. Well, anyway, you're here. Two peas, two bees, two fleas, whatever it is this week. And Nick rushed over to the theater this weekend. To squeak in a viewing of Past Lives, a film that I saw a couple weeks ago that I didn't know we were doing an episode on, so it's not a mystery that I really adored this film. I liked it a whole lot, so I'm looking forward to discussing that with you. I have no idea what you thought about it as of yet, as we're sitting here. And we had this quick banter last week, and we're kind of building the template for the show. And instead of just like random whatever, we decided to come up with kind of a fun segment at the top here. And it can be related to the movie. It can be related to like the themes of the movie or whatever. But we're going to throw an important question at each other. And that'll kind of be the start of the show. So we're going to call it one important question to get things going. So, Nick, do you want to hit me with your question or do you want me to give you mine?
The floor is yours, my friend.
All right. Now, this is somewhat in relation to Past Lives. I was inspired by the movie to come up with this question. Mm-hmm. But we have crossroads in our life, right? Like we come to crossroads at different stages of our life, different points of our life. So my question to you is, what choice were you faced with at a crossroads in your life that you wish you could go back and rethink the choice that you made?
Wow. What choice?
And you can think as long as you want because Dan's editing this.
I mean that honest to God, it's a good question, and it kind of dips a touch into like the question I am going to ask you as well, like because mine was extremely similar. So I'm going to put it on the table right now so we can both take time to think about both of them. But mine was, rewrite an event of your life, and how do you think your life would have changed rewriting that major event in your life to come out like the outcome comes out the opposite way or just a different way or whatever. Like what trajectory do you think your life would have taken? Because I feel like those are really similar, and I like that we were both kind of in that same headspace thinking about this movie, because that's the kind of questioning and that's the kind of thinking that this movie really elicits from you when you're sitting there in the theater watching it,
Well, that's a tough thing, right? Because it's like we both have families, we both have children, we've been married, etc.
And here's the other thing, just to jump in on this too, there's an impossibility to that question, to finding an answer to that question, because the Gerald that knows the answer to that question is a completely different person than the Gerald that's sitting on the other side of this call for me right now. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And that's why, like, thinking of your question to me, like, what would I go back and change? Like, I think about, and I thought so much about so many different things for this film, but like, say I decided to go to college straight out of high school instead of delaying to go to college until I was 25. Well, then the person that's listening to this, editing it right now, I wouldn't even know him. I never would have met Dan. I met Dan in Clarion. I met Dan in college, and I can't imagine my life without Dan,
I can't, but that's fine.
Like, I think about all these choices that I've made that have made me into this person that I am. And the only one that I really think I would go back and I would take back is Dan's going to hoot and holler when he hears it, but I wouldn't have gotten married.
The first time.
I wouldn't have gotten married because it was a terrible, toxic marriage. It was not good. It was definitely not good for me. It took me to the lowest and darkest places that I've ever been in my entire life. But I also think, even in saying that, as I answer the question that way, I think of the things that I was able to reclaim from myself or for myself out of that. I think of the ways that I was able to change, and I think of how important it is for me to reach out and help other people who might be struggling with the kinds of things that I struggled with back then.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that I like think about all the stuff that I talk about on Nikolai's Kitchen, like all the like super serious stuff. Would even half of that exist if not for all the things that I went through there,
Right.
too?
Right.
You know, so
right, that you had to reflect on or whatever.
It's a really tough question, and I don't think, honest to God, and this is a silly cop out for our first time doing this segment, but I love this segment. We got to keep doing it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I don't know. I don't think I have an answer to the question. I really don't.
Well, the thing is that it's tough because, and you kind of already alluded to it a little bit, but it's like everything that exists now that we love in our life, albeit mostly our family and like our kids, for example. Yeah. Like if I hadn't met my wife or my wives, because I was married once before and I have a daughter from that marriage,
yeah,
and I have two sons from my current marriage, would those lives be on Earth? You know, would they exist if the things hadn't played out the way they played out? So, I guess answering this question, I just want to put an asterisk. It doesn't mean I want to change anything in my life currently, because I love my kids and I love all the things that have happened throughout the course of my life. But I've always been, and this might be a little personal, but I've always been kind of unfulfilled professionally in my life.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily about money or anything like that, because that's not what I'm talking about. I don't know. I just feel like I'm just kind of working for the man my whole life, and I'm not
you
really
just answered my question for me too. Actually, just to circle back to it, I would have stayed when I was a senior at Clarion. They offered a film major. They didn't have a film major before that, and I did a film studies minor that they like discontinued like after I took 2/3 of the classes from it. So I took a whole bunch of film studies classes and all these different things, like a screenwriting class, all this stuff that I really, really loved. And then they took all that away. But then, like I said, when I was in my 4th year, they offered a film major. So I would stay for that film major, just gut it out. I had all the like general stuff that you needed. All I needed was the specialized stuff. Would have taken me another year and a half, maybe 2 years to finish it, or I'd have gone to grad school straight out. I'd have gone to grad school straight out for residence life, for student services and stuff like that. Because I really, really loved that part of my college experience. I really, really loved being part of res life. That was one of the things that meant like the absolute most to me. It was wonderful. I really, really loved it. And I really loved working with students. And I really think that I could have continued with that and had an amazing career in that. I mean, granted, like it's like we're talking about like the Nick that would be sitting here would be a completely different person than that person. But then, like, we'll talk about it when we get more into the film. It kind of depends on how much you believe in, like they talk about in the film, like the Inyun, the kind of Korean belief in fate or whatever. That, you know, like if two lives are kind of meant to touch together, like brush together, like in one way or another, then that's kind of fate, like just repeating over and over in every different life that we lead. So, you know, but still, that's to circle back to my question. I didn't mean to jump back in on there.
No, you're good.
When you were saying that, I immediately was like, yeah, I know exactly what I would do.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's the exact same thing. I mean, it's kind of like we're having the back and forth, because it's like I don't want to change anything necessarily that's around me now, but I've just always been unfulfilled professionally. And it's kind of similar to what you said. You know, when I went to college, I'm dating myself a little bit, but it was the mid 90s when I started college. I started college in the fall of 94.
Yeah.
And my first major at UNC Greensboro was, back then it was called media studies. And there were different aspects of, like, they had like a film segment, television, they had the production side of it. You know, they had people that were acting on theater and stuff like that, but it was all media studies.
Yeah.
And I kind of got away from it, and I went in this direction. Was weird, but I switched my major to political science, and I did that, and I did English, and I don't know, it was weird. So I kind of got away from it. So I guess a simple answer would be, I wish I had kind of stuck with the media studies and I played played that out a little bit, like my
Yeah.
love of movies, maybe even being able to like teach that stuff
Mm-hmm.
on a high school or college level would have been something I wouldn't have been paid as much, but I mean, I probably would have been a lot more fulfilled and I
Yeah.
would have enjoyed it a lot more, but it's weird, right? Because it's like, well, if I do one thing different, it's like we were talking about The Flash last week.
Mm-hmm.
Like he goes back and the little thing he just wants to do different, but it spirals out of control, and the next thing you know, like, is my daughter born? Do I meet my current wife at my restaurant job? You know what I mean? Like all this other shit just kind of spirals. So it's one of those very like existential questions that I'm sure people ponder frequently. But for me, it's just like the simple answer is just choosing a different career path, I think is what I would probably have done out of college.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to kind of think about, and I wrote this in my review. I didn't post it on Letterboxd. Yeah, it'll be up obviously after this review goes up. But I talked about like the cinema landscape right now, like over the past couple of years, has been littered with all these different movies about multiverses and stuff.
Yeah.
You've got your Doctor Strange, you've got your Everything Everywhere All at Once, you've got your Flash, you've got all these different things and like even like Avengers and like these different things, a lot of bigger budget stuff, but like all to ask these kind of existential questions. What if you go back and change something? What if something was different at some key point in history? How would that change everything going forward?
I mean, hell, even Back to the Future. I mean, not to interrupt you, but even Back to the Future.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
I mean, that trilogy
Future with the Sports Almanac. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, really, this film asks those same questions, but it doesn't give you the answers. It lets you as the audience member ponder on it. And that's why this is the kind of film, when you see it, it sticks with you way after you walk out of that cinema. And I mean way after you walk out.
Well, that could be a segue then. All right, you ready, Nick? So we're gonna I'm gonna say ready, set, go.
Ooh, we didn't set, really go. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah,
ready. We're ready, set, go.
10 out of 10,
10
baby.
10 out of 10. 10 out of 10.
Wow.
You too.
Wow.
Perfect
score from the P's, baby.
Oh my God.
Let me ask you a question. Movie of the year for you so far?
Yes. It is my number one film. It's my only 10 so far this year.
Easily movie of the year for me so far. 100%. I mean,
wow.
Unbelievable how much this film stays with you after you, because it's like we talked about with the one big question, right? It's like we talked about. It elicits in you all of a sudden start asking all those questions about your life. What if you had, like, if things had worked out differently and you had stayed with your first wife, and never met like your second wife or anything like that?
It's crazy to think about. It really is.
Completely different person. You would be a completely different person than you are.
Everything
right now.
Around me would be different.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, everybody that's connected to me would be different. Like it just everything. It's a domino effect. So we're gonna do a little spoiler-free section here. So let me just give a real quick. I'm gonna read the Letterboxd synopsis on these, or I'll have Nick do it some weeks. But Nora and Hae-sung, two deeply connected childhood friends, are wrest apart after Nora's family immigrates from South Korea. 20 years later, they are reunited for one fateful week as they confront notions of love and destiny. That's the general synopsis on Letterboxd. Spoiler free. Obviously, we both gave it 10 out of 10. Nick, I mean, beautiful.
As high as a recommend gets, baby.
Tragic. I mean, I will say this, and then we can get into the spoilers and stuff. One spoiler free thing I'll say about this movie is that I was 100% invested in all the main characters. It's really Nora and Hae-sung, but also her husband, her new husband as well. Like, I was invested in his story too, because I connected with him more than anybody as an American. I mean, first and foremost, but as kind of this outsider to, their kind of friendship and their insider stuff that they had that I didn't really get. A language barrier perhaps, but also you kind of felt for the husband. Just, I don't know. We'll get into it when we get to our spoiler section.
So there's so much,
but I was always
so much
invested
to unfold with this movie. There's so many different layers of this onion to peel back. So Yeah, I'll agree with you 100%. I don't think there's a bad guy in this movie. I think
Right.
that every character, like, you fully understand who that character is and where they're coming from in their actions in the film. And yeah, we'll get into like all the spoilers and everything. But let me just say this. Absolutely one of and this is her first film, Celine Song, the writer
Oh
director
my
of this.
god, I can't believe that.
How deliberately is every single second of screen time in this film executed? Every scene, like there are scenes that just linger with silence and just long shots on characters staring at each other. Just these
Mhm.
insanely intensely powerful moments, and then you have incredible performances from Greta Lee, from T.U. and John Magaro. Like all three of them, like powerhouse performances in those scenes where there is just like a couple of feet, like a couple of a space between people. There's a shot in the trailer that they show, and it's one of the scenes in the film, but like Nora and Haesung are on is it a subway car or whatever, and their
Mhm.
hands are just on the pole. Their hands are
Mhm.
just on the pole, and their hands aren't touching, but their hands are right next to each other. But you can
And the
almost
way that's
see
shot,
the
and the way that's shot,
electricity coming off
yeah.
of it.
Mhm.
You know,
Yep.
like that's it's everything in this film is so deliberately, so perfectly executed by God,
Celine
fucking
Song.
name. There we go. Sorry,
Mhm.
cut all that, Dan. Everything is so perfectly executed by writer director Celine Song that it's so investing. It's just so investing, and it pulls you into its world, and it makes you care about every single one of these characters like so deeply. I was like really like I was like tearing up writing my review, just even thinking about
Mhm.
all these characters and all of the different scenarios that they must like the range of emotions that all these characters must go through and had to go through and had to show is mind blowing. Really
I
is.
agree. I agree. So we're in full agreement here. So it's not going to be a big argument this week, which is
Mm,
great because
no.
like I said, it's my favorite film of the year so far. So let's get into some just open discussion about past lives. So guys, going forward, there will be spoilers for this movie. It is still in theaters and it's probably going to be streaming soon. If you have not seen it yet, then you'll want to skip ahead to after the full spoiler section as we get into it here. So, Nick, when we had the kind of setup, if you will, and a lot of the childhood scenes were so tender and touching, and
Mm.
oh my god, like I have like my son Logan's 10 years old. I think they were maybe 12 in those scenes or
12, yeah, they were
somewhere
12.
12, yeah.
Cuz they did everything
And I
at like
see
12-year intervals, I think.
right, yeah, and I see his kind of friendships now as a 10-year-old, and then I even look at other movies that I love, like, Stand By Me and The Sandlot, and, like, a lot of childhood friendships really start to become personal to you, and they start to really, quote, unquote, "mean something to you," and you
Mhm.
start to feel different emotions around that age.
Mhm.
How did you feel about the first quarter of the movie when they were kinda setting up what we were gonna get, but you had the childhood story in Korea, which I thought was beautiful.
Yeah, I mean it's really wonderful. And I'll say this from the outset. This film is very much two things. Number one, it is a first time director. So there are some very deliberately staged shots. Like this is obviously the metaphor, the visual representation of what she's trying to go for. Like when they're kids and they say goodbye and they literally split them off on the screen. She goes up a set of stairs this way and he goes down a road this way. I mean, it is very literal in that way, so you have to kind of you have to just be understanding of that. I love visual representations of that kind of stuff, so I'm not going to complain about it. But that kind of thing is in there. And number two, this is a writer's movie as well. I really love. There's a
Mhm.
scene later when Nora and Arthur are in bed, and like he's a writer and she's a playwright. So like he's literally describing like his arc
He's
as a
telling us
character
the
in the
story of
movie.
past lives. Yeah, no, I
Literally,
love it.
he describes
Yeah.
his arc as a character in the film, and I loved that as a writer myself. I really loved that it was just a writer's movie and that she just straight leaned into it. That was great. Yeah, the stuff as kids, like the stuff of them together as kids, like it's quiet and it's beautiful. Like it's not like they're like making out or anything. And they're 12,
No.
but they like she like falls asleep on him and they're holding hands
Right.
and
In
all
the
these different
car. Yeah.
things.
It's just
And
so
like
innocent and beautiful,
yeah,
man. It was like really, it had which I guess makes sense because they're 12, but it just had that childlike.
Yeah.
innocence to it that was really special, and I really
Mm-hmm.
felt like that was an important part of the movie for us to be able to buy into, what we were going to see from these characters going forward. And I just want to tell you real quick too, when you were talking about that scene about the split where they're essentially saying goodbye to each other for the
Yep.
next 20 years basically,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't know how to process that as a 12-year-old, really. You know what I mean?
No.
Like, I don't think they really knew the gravity of, like, oh, I'm never going to see this person again. But Celine Song makes a conscious decision as a filmmaker later in the movie, at the end of the movie, when the two adults, they're back together, and she flashes back to that.
Yeah.
And I freaking lost it, bro. Like,
Yeah.
that was such a, like, unexpected flashback kind of to them as kids, but
Yeah.
I don't know, man. It just did something to me personally. Like, I was really emotional after that kind of callback, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, we'll get to the ending. We'll get to the ending of the film more, obviously, as we discuss everything here. But yeah, I mean, the childhood sections really have to lay the groundwork for. There's clearly these two would have had some kind of future, or something would have probably developed between
Yeah.
these two if they had been able to stay together and even stay in touch with each other. Like, they literally have no contact once she leaves and they move to Toronto. They immigrate to Toronto. So they never have any contact or anything like that after that, which is like a long, long time to kind of spend like all this time with someone as a child and kind of grow closer to them, become a confidant with them, and all these different things, and then to just completely lose that, like to completely lose like this one person to whom you form this like really emotional attachment is something that would be really, really powerful. I'm not somebody who got uprooted a lot myself as a kid. I don't know if you were, so I can't
No.
really speak to a lot of that kind of stuff. And I'll say this from the outset as well. Like, we make this joke about the meme of our podcast all the time, that we're two white dudes, middle-aged white dudes, talking about movies on a podcast, which is groundbreaking stuff.
Yeah.
There's a whole sub layer of this that I could never understand as somebody who, was born in America and raised here, of, somebody who grows up in a completely different culture and then is an immigrant to a new culture. And she does it twice too. First they go to Canada and then to New York when she moves to New York. I mean, that's probably less of a culture shock than, say, moving from South Korea to Canada was. But yeah, there's that whole separate level of this too that I can't even begin to understand as a viewer. So I'm just, that's probably the only time I'm really going to mention it, because I don't think I can. I
Right.
don't think I can possibly comment on it in a way that's going to give it the gravity that it deserves.
Yeah, it would be similar. Like, if we uprooted and moved to Korea, we might know how it felt.
Yeah,
I mean, you're
exactly.
just not going to know. But another thing that I thought was beautiful in the script too was how she mentioned, later in the adult version of herself, Nora, she mentioned how he always was like there to kind of talk her down from her temper tantrums, and
Hmm.
there was a lot of callbacks to them as kids, and you got
Hmm.
the sense that they didn't really share a ton of time together before she left,
Hmm.
but it was impactful to her that she was still kind of talking about it, decades later.
And she got to be emotional too. Like, there's the whole kind of through line through the entire film where when she was a little girl in Korea with him, she used to cry all the time to him about like whatever. And once they immigrate, she doesn't do that anymore. Like, she said, she stops crying because nobody's listening, nobody cares, because he was the one person that listened and that cared whenever she would cry. And I
Yeah.
really, really, I really, really love that they kind of keep referring back to that, because then, of course, we get to like the ending of the film, which, like I said, we'll talk about more in depth. But we get to that ending of the film when she finally lets go of that piece of her childhood, that piece that she's clinging to, and is finally able to let go of her emotions again and breaks down. It's so moving, it's so powerful, and I really, really love that they, like I said, all that emotionality really has to get built up when they're kids, and I think the film does a masterful job of it. It really, really does.
So I think when you're talking about this movie, and I haven't listened to anyone else review this film or anything like that, I don't know the way to really go about it. But I think when reviewing this movie, especially with somebody I'm comfortable with like you, it's almost like a lot of like what ifs and what did you think about this? And as opposed to like, here's, scene A and scene B and scene C. You know what I mean? Like the story kind of is what it is, and it's told beautifully. But I guess like I'll just pose this to you just because I just thought of this. So it really comes down to, so Nora's moved on because really, I mean, because she had to, and she's remarried. So it's like, are you okay with that for her? Like when you were watching this movie, were you ever like, Hey Sung is her soulmate, like she should be with him? Or were you like okay with the path that she was now on? Like, did that ever kind of cross your mind? Because really it's about her at the central focus, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And she has these two different paths where it's like she could be with the person that I think is supposed to be kind of painted as her, I guess soulmate's the best way to put it, kind of like childhood sweetheart that she probably would have been with had she stayed there, versus kind of the American version of him because, you know, she fast forwarded X number of years and now she's in America and this is who she fell in love with here. And they had I thought they had kind of a beautiful origin story too, even though he kind of talks about it like it's nothing. I thought it was pretty cool because they both met doing something they love at the writer's retreat and all that stuff. I thought that was a really cool kind of origin story, but he kind of downplays it.
Well,
But I'm
that's why
just curious. I'm just curious what you think.
Arthur's one of the most fascinating characters in this film because he's got this very deep insecurity about this part of her life that he can never be a part of. He can never touch because he didn't grow up as an immigrant either. He didn't grow up and have that connection to her as a little girl in Korea. He doesn't have any, like, he says she dreams in Korean. He says you dream in a language I can't understand.
Right.
And like for him, you could tell that there's this deep rooted insecurity, like in believing that she always longs for this life that she left behind or whatever back in Korea. To answer your original question, no, I don't think so, because I don't think that's the journey that this film is trying to take you on. I think that you can definitely view it that way, and I think that that's one quote life that could have been lived. That's one path that could have been followed. But I don't think the film tries to take Nora on that journey. And they have these beautiful exchanges. But one of the things that Hae-sung says to her is that, he's a branch and she's a bird. And she's the one who leaves, and like for Arthur, she's the one that stays. Like because of her ambitions, because of the person that she is, because of the trajectory that she's on, she was never going to be happy staying in Korea and chasing after like whatever like traditional Korean life is like in that kind of sense. She was never going to be happy there with the ambition and everything that she describes every stage of her life. And there's a third stage that we haven't even really mentioned here. Obviously when they're kids and obviously when they meet again in New York, but then there's this interceding stage too where they reconnect via the internet and they're not dating, but they're basically like just kind of Skype calling each other like all the time.
And they're looking forward to their calls, and yeah.
Like obviously they're kind of like reinvesting in each other emotionally, like super big time. Really great.
She really steps up during that segment too. I thought it was a very strong, courageous moment on her part as a character, because I don't know if you remember, she has that one, line to him where she's like, I should be doing this and that. I should be living my life essentially, but I'm looking up flights to Korea.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out how to, and I can't go. So why am I doing that? And
yeah,
I think we've all kind of been in those scenarios where it's like, what are we really doing here? Like, is this benefiting my current situation? And I thought that was really courageous on her character's part, and it had to be tough because they, like you said, they were talking multiple times a day. They were essentially together in that portion. I mean,
in a sense,
long distance kind of deal or whatever, but
yeah. But yeah, it was something that, she was torn because it was obviously pulling her back to her roots, back to that part of her that she left behind when her family immigrated. But also it was in conflict with the person that she had become. It was in conflict with the goals and aspirations that she had at that point in her life. So it was never going to be, it was just never going to work like at that stage. And like I said, that's why I don't view it that way. I don't view it as Hae-sung was her soulmate and they should have gotten together at the end of the film, and it should have been like that, cliched kind of Hollywood ending of them making out, and like she leaves and goes back to Korea with it. She never would have been happy in that life.
Right.
This version of her in this life, it never would have been happy living that life. She was where she needed to be. She was where she, like, as she says, this is where I ended up. Like, this is where I need to be. This is my life. This is where I need to be.
Did you get this? Did you get the sense though? Because you could tell that he was a little, like you said, insecure too. Her husband.
Oh, Arthur for sure was, yeah, 100%.
Yeah, Arthur. And there's that one really cool scene where, he's like trying to figure out how to react as a husband, and he was a very level-headed, like, cool dude. Like you said, he was not a bad guy in any way. He never showed to me as an audience member that I should not be rooting for him. Like, I always felt like I was always sympathetic to his situation. But they have that one scene where she's getting ready or whatever, and he's like asking her, like, "Are you attracted to him?" Or, well, he says, "Do you think he's attractive?"
Yeah,
and she's basically like, "Yeah, I would say he's attractive."
Mm-hmm.
And then he's like, "Well, are you attracted to him?" And we know she is. I mean, we kind of get the, obviously, and she kind of gives the wife answer where it's like, I don't think so. And it's kind of like, all right, but you get, like, especially if you've been in a marriage or if you're in a marriage, like, you kind of get the things that you kind of have to tiptoe around a little bit to keep peace or whatever. And I thought they did a really good job. I thought Celine Song and the actors involved in the script, like, it was really well done to kind of, because you mentioned Arthur's story before, and it was real. Like, it felt real. Like, I don't feel like, maybe in the sequel, if we want to talk Hollywood lingo, but I don't think there's any world where, like, if she left Arthur and ended up with Hae Sung in this movie, that would not feel real to me. No. You know what I mean? That wouldn't feel like something that would
not
with
the
happen.
Journey that this character went on in this film. Like, we already know all of the things that she has gone through to get her to where she is when she's living in New York. That version of Nora never would have been happy. It's kind of like she talks to him because her Korean name is Na Young, and they adopt an English name whenever they move to Canada, whenever they immigrate to Canada. So she has a line of dialogue to him later on where she says, like, that Na Young is gone. Like, I left Na Young behind in Korea when I left. Like, Na Young is gone. Like, that little girl that you knew is gone. And that's because she is. Now, you can get into all of the discussions, and like what the film is really, really, really truthfully about is, what if she had never left Korea? Mm-hmm. What if there was no Nora? What if it was just Na Young? That's where this film ultimately directs you. That's where this film ultimately pushes you through that concept of Inyun, which is like the Korean kind of idea of fate and everything. That to me is so, it's just so wonderfully done. But yeah, I'm surprised to read, because I have seen some reviews and stuff, because I was just combing for more information about this film. That's how I know I'm going to give a film 10 out of 10. When I get out of a theater, I can't stop thinking about it, and I'm looking up everything I can about it. I'm trying to learn everything I possibly can about it.
Right.
So it surprised me in, like, digging up information about this film that there were some people, and they were the minority of all the information that I saw, but there were some people that, like, really wanted or expected her to leave with Hae Sung and go back to Korea. And I mean, if that's the way you saw the film, if that's the journey this film took you on, I understand, but that's not the way that I watched it at all. I don't think that Nora, that character, would never have been happy going back to Korea and living that role, like, just marrying Hae Sung and just being part of his. Never. I don't think that ever would have worked. I think what we're, as an audience, instead intended to kind of take away from it is, we think of the version of that little girl that never left Korea. We think of, if she would have stayed there, how much different would her life have been? She would have been an entirely different person. They would have grown up, continued to stay together, continued to bond together, probably gotten married, like all those different things. I think that that's where the film takes you instead. I
agree. I think it I already kind of mentioned, I feel like the movie is really centered on Nora's journey, and then 100%. All this other stuff's kind of going on around her. But she has this internal struggle because I feel like, especially when we get to the New York stuff, you get the sense that she feels her comfort zone is probably in her roots in Korea. And with Haesung, she feels comfortable, like, oh, this is where this is where I started. This is my origin.
Yeah.
But that's not who she is now. So there is a bit of comfort that comes in doing what we're kind of used to and what we're familiar with and what we kind of like are fondly remembering, and I feel like she's doing that a lot of times and she's trying to kind of go back to her childhood. But then the reality of it is that she's in New York, she's living the life that she's living. She's with Arthur, who she loves. I mean, he's a good husband.
Yep.
It's not like this is a bad dude.
Yep.
If they had painted Arthur, if he was written as some kind of villain or had some flaws that were like really highlighted in the movie, then maybe we could, as an audience member, go, okay, well, this is your chance to like, you know, be Matthew McConaughey and Kate Hudson in any other romantic comedy.
Right.
You know what I mean? But that wasn't the case. Like I said, it was written very real. And I wanted to tell you a story, Nick. So we had a play date for my son a couple weeks ago, or actually last weekend. And I had seen the movie, and the mom of the kid that we went on the play date with is a huge movie fan. And she was like, "So I heard Past Lives was like your favorite movie of the year." And I was like, "Oh yeah, absolutely loved it. I just saw it." And she was like, "Well, I went to see it yesterday, and like I just don't know. Like I liked it, but I don't. It wasn't the movie of the year for me. Like I don't know what Nora was doing at the end of the movie." And so I kind of talked to her a little bit. I'm like, "What do you mean?" And she's like, "Well, she just didn't do anything. Like it just kind of ended, and she just kind of let him leave, and that was it." And I was kind of
Yeah.
like, well, and I had just met this woman, by the way,
Right.
so I didn't want to but I was like, and she's awesome. But I was like, yeah, well, I think that's kind of the point, is that she was in her situation that she was in, and she was in a happy marriage with someone. She was leaving a professional life in New York City. So like it was really devastating for her emotionally, but like how could she just up and like go to Korea with her childhood sweetheart? You know what I mean? Like think about it from a realistic standpoint. And I think if you just like put, in other words, like if you and I were friends with Nora, like what would she do? You know what I mean? She wouldn't call us and be like, "I'm moving to Korea, my Korea, my childhood sweetheart. I'm see you later," Like it just wouldn't be real at that point to me. But it was interesting to kind of have that conversation, and with
Yeah.
a woman no less.
Yeah.
Like it was kind of, I was surprised to kind of hear that take, if you will.
Yeah. No. I think this film ends, and I think this film gets to that point because it exactly needs to. That's exactly where this film should have ended. She finally lets go of this thing that she had when she was a child. She finally lets go of all of it. Like she finally is able to get closure, like is able to see him again, and kind of, I mean, she's obviously gonna like probably always still have some kind of feelings and whatnot for him, but just seeing her reinforces for her the fact that she belongs where she belongs, that she belongs in this life. And now that she's like finally gotten that closure and gotten past him, now she can go to Arthur and now she can cry. Now she can have that breakdown for him instead.
Yeah, let's just go ahead and talk about the ending. Just period. Yeah,
God,
go ahead.
I
I mean,
like
what Greta Lee does in that last like 5 minutes, I thought was like just I was.
Well, I mean, and even
flabbergasted.
beyond that, like think about the way that Celine's song, like think about the way that the shot is staged, like, and it's all like one pretty much continuous shot for like,
Yeah.
I mean, there's a couple of
It's like
cuts
one
in there in
block
different
or
places,
whatever.
but
Yeah.
it's like they walk all the way down this block and they get to like in front of these garage doors. They're like perfectly framed out by the garage doors. They stop, and then literally there's nothing. There's just silence, and they're just
Waiting
staring
on
at
the
each
Uber.
other,
Mhm.
literally just staring at each other. And then his Uber gets there, and I loved like the exchange that really leveled me. Like it wasn't even her emotionally up to that point, but the thing that really leveled me was he's about to get in the Uber and he turns back to her and he says, "Do you think that this is a past life? Like, do you think that this is a past life that we're living now? And like, what do you think would happen in the next one? Like, what do you think we're going to be in the next life?" And she's just like, "I don't know. Like,
She doesn't know what to
I don't
say.
know."
Mhm.
And he basically, because he's reached that closure point too. He's like, "Okay, like I'm not gonna have her in this life, and that's okay." And then he's just like, I'll see you then.
I'll see you there.
Just knowing that in whatever other life, and you got to believe in reincarnation, or at least like the idea of it that this film is selling to you to really understand that. But like, that's the journey that it's taking you on. Like, he's letting go of her in this life because he knows he's not going to have her, but he's okay with that because he knows he's going to see her in the next life. And he just says, I'll see you then. Like, that is devastating, man. That's devastating in like in one of the most beautiful ways like possible, because it's not a sad ending. Like, it's not a bad ending for either one of them. She's going back to a marriage that is good and fulfills her, and he's going back to Korea with the closure that I think he never got over 20 years of not having been able to see her. It's so beautiful. It's unfathomably beautiful.
I don't think it really would necessarily be this way. But did you ever see Call Me by Your Name? Did you ever see that?
Yeah.
So I've always kind of used this like thought process, and I kind of thought about that again at the end of Past Lives, where it's like, you have to, and I think Celine Song does a great job of making this happen, at least for me, but you have to be able to put yourself in the character's shoes and really think about what they're facing. And how would you feel if you knew that person was leaving and you were never going to see him again, like in this life? Like, like you said, I've had my closure. I've said my goodbyes. This was a great time. But when I leave and you're out of my field of vision, I'm literally never going to see you again in my physical space.
Yeah.
Like, that's just a heavy, heavy emotional thing to kind of take in. And I got that a lot with this movie too. And that's why when she breaks down, when she goes back to Arthur, we as the audience are essentially breaking down with her, because we feel like, well, that was that. Right? Like, that is what it is. A chapter's closed. And like you said, I mean, it's not a bad ending. Like, I don't feel sad about it necessarily. I don't think sadness is the right emotion I'm trying to tell you that I felt. I just felt like an upwelling of emotion for her having to let all of that kind of go.
Yeah.
And it's like, we have to move on with our life now. It was great, and I'm always going to have those memories, but kind of like her character says in the movie, this is where I'm supposed to be now,
Yeah.
And I felt good about it.
I mean, like I said, that's the part that really devastates me, because I'm a person that like constantly like tries to think about, and we talked about this with our question at the top of the show, but like all those branching kind of things, all those different paths that your life can take. Maybe in the next life she doesn't leave. Maybe in the next life they get to be together. They get to like experience all that kind of thing together. And even if not, like, even if like there's a set of circumstances or a set of different things that happens in each of those different lives, each of those subsequent times when they constantly pass together, like, even if not, it's just the idea that they kind of keep crossing over and over one another and keep brushing by each other's clothing. Like, that's a big thing that they talk about in the film. Like, even brushing past them, like, it means that they were connected in a previous life, and like I said, you've got to kind of understand, like, maybe not believe, but for necessarily understand the concept of reincarnation and whatnot to really buy into that whole thing.
Right.
But like I said, I think there's just a devastating beauty to that. Just that idea of accepting and saying, I'm not going to have you in this life, and that's okay. I'll see you in the next one.
Crazy.
That to me,
and then the shot to and like I said at the beginning, the shot to them as kids too.
Yeah.
At that moment, I mean, I didn't expect that. That just really got me.
It's
like, I literally started welling up when
that idea of like the people that truly are meant to be part of our lives, that your quote unquote soulmates, if you will. I don't necessarily think that a soulmate is a I think you make a soulmate. I think in this life, I think Arthur's her soulmate. I think in another life that Hae-sung could be her soulmate.
Right.
And I think that it could be even different people that she's crossed paths with at different points in different lives as well. So I think that that's a fluid thing. I don't think that that's necessarily like a concrete thing, but I love that idea of, just having different soulmates over different paths and different periods in your life. And like the circumstances that have taken you, Gerald Morris, to the point where you are in your life right now, if you go back and change something, 20, 30, 40 years ago to put yourself on a completely different path and trajectory. You could be completely some other different entire version of this person who, you know,
Right.
maybe like has the same voice or like a couple, like has the same beard or whatever else, but
Of course, I have
necessarily
the same beard.
fundamentally you're a completely different person and you have a completely different soulmate, you know?
Well, what's interesting is that Past Lives is like a subdued, quiet, romantic kind of version of like those multiverse stories that we've been getting a lot of lately,
It really is, yeah.
because this movie could have, if it wanted to, it could have been that movie where it showed us, her life with Haesung, and it showed us, what I mean, but it didn't do that. It,
And
like you
that's the
said at
La
the
La
top.
Land thing, right? Like that's how
Yeah.
La La Land ends, where it gives you that idyllic version of this is what their life could have been, but they're okay with like, okay, I know you're moving on with your life, I know you're going to go on and live your life and be who you are and do your thing,
Right.
and they just give each other that little nod at the end of La La Land. That's what this movie is, except for it doesn't give you that. It doesn't give you that scene literally. It wants you as the viewer to imagine it. It wants you as the viewer to cast like those people in different roles in different lives at different like stages of eternity basically, and play those scenarios out in your head. Do I believe, like watching this film, do I believe that there's a version of these characters in some other life that's are perfectly happy together raising a family in Korea? Yeah, absolutely. And that I think is what this film's great success, at least for me, is, because the thing is like films like this, and the reason why I really love films like this is because they bring me out of the theater and they make me think about all these different moments and all these different things that have happened in my life. You know, all the different people that I've been intertwined with at different points and periods in my life. You know, and I like the idea, maybe more in some cases than others, that I would cross paths with some of these people that, you know, maybe touched my life in one way or another in a different way, in a different time. I'm where I'm supposed to be now. This is where I'm supposed to be. I am this person that I am. All the things that have happened to me have made me into this person that I am.
Right.
So, like, I love being here. I love being this person. I love doing this. You know, but it's
Yeah.
like we talked about earlier. Like, imagine there's a version of me that never goes to Clarion. Well, then I never would have met Dan. He wouldn't be editing this podcast episode right now because he probably wouldn't be a podcaster. I might not have even been a podcaster because Netflix and Swill only started because they were like the Netflix knockoff of the Epic Film guys, you know, and like we might have never met as a result. Like think about all these different
I know.
things that ripple forward, like all these
Yep.
different changes, these even if they seem minute at the time, these different things that could have changed and made our lives completely different from what they are, like the set of circumstances. And that's why like you think about things like Watchmen, when Dr. Manhattan decides to save the earth because
Oh yeah.
he realizes that Lori is like the thermodynamic miracle, like the number of circumstances, the different number of things that had to happen to bring us two people into this circumstance right now doing this exact thing.
Yep.
It's
And that's
crazy
what
to think about.
and that's what this movie is a beautiful, poignant story, but it also does allow you to really ponder those questions about your own life,
Yeah,
which I think is really special when a movie can do that, because I don't
100%.
necessarily know that Celine Song was out to do that when she made this movie, but she really does kind of open up that like mental kind of like pathways in your mind where you're like, I mean, we open the show with basically asking each other the same question, which, like, what would you have done at different intersections in your life and
Hmm.
crossroads in your life? And this movie really does kind of open up your mind to a lot of that kind of existential stuff that you might not think about every single day.
Yeah.
So, we're going to wrap up. Obviously, we loved it. We both gave it a 10 out of 10, which means the 2P score on Past Lives is a 10 out of 10, a
Yeah.
perfect film in our second review together.
Super early front runner for film of the year,
I
like
wonder if that'll
overall,
happen
like between
again,
both of
Nick.
us at the end of the year. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I know you're not as big of an Academy guy as I am, but I think it's going to be nominated for picture, and I hope Greta Lee is going to be nominated for actress.
Celine Song needs to be
I
nominated
know,
for
I know,
directing here.
I know, but
I
she's
think she'll
first
definitely
time.
get
I don't know.
nominated for writing. I think that the Academy will definitely throw a nomination her way for writing.
I hope
Directing is
so.
trickier because they're an old boys club and they don't like to let
I
girls play in their
know.
sandbox. But
And it's the
she
first one, and you got Greta
so
Gerwig this year, and so many others.
masterfully,
Yeah,
brilliantly, deliberately directs every single second of this film, and it is masterful. It
it
really,
really
really
is
is.
phenomenal that it's her first. I mean,
Yeah,
I couldn't believe it. Like I looked her up, I'm like, what? Like
yeah,
what? Where did you go to film school? Like this is tremendous.
yeah.
I couldn't believe it. All right, we're going to wrap up the episode, but before we do, Nick, we go over to the comments section. Now, this was a quick one. We just threw it up a couple days ago because, like I said, we weren't sure we were recording this. So I'm going to use the one I got on Twitter from patron Jason Nerdrovert. So I'll let you go and give me your question.
So the question I'm going to pick is from the man, the myth, the legend himself, Destruction in Human Form, Mr. Jared Taylor. Love you, Jared. Would this be in your top 5 films by a first-time director? Man, that's a hard question, isn't it? That is
First
a tough question.
Yeah.
I'm gonna kick this into the top 10 discussion because I'm trying to think of all of the first films that I've ever seen in my life and how transformative some of them have been. Like think about like Tarantino, Reservoir Dogs.
I know, dude. Yeah.
I mean, there's just a lot of really, really great first-time directors that I've seen.
I feel like, I
from.
feel like, Jared, this is a question that we would have to answer after some research.
I think we would have to do some research. I think we got to circle back to it at some point, though.
I do. I think we should. But I will say to Jared's question that I think that an argument can be made because, like I said, I'm really floored by
she belongs in the conversation for
the
sure,
craft and yeah. I mean, just being able to elicit that much emotion,
executed.
Just being able to elicit that much emotion as a first-time director is uncanny. Over on Twitter, my boy Jason hit me up and he said, "Do you think this is in the top tier of A24 films?" So A24 has done some good stuff, and I haven't put this in my A24 ranking as of yet. But I would say this is probably top tier A24. I mean, the only movies that I may rank higher off the top of my head from A24 would be like The Witch, Hereditary, maybe a lot of horror stuff that Nick doesn't care about. But Lady Bird, maybe, I don't know. Yeah, this is probably top 10 A24, I would think. Nick, do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, 100% it is. And I mean, just by the nature of the score, like, you know, there's a lot of different films that I'll see that really move me and that really take me on an emotional journey, but they aren't quite this precisely perfectly made. Like, they aren't quite this meticulously told. And I think that's 100% to Celine Song's credit. I think that is 100% a credit to, I mean, it's a very small cast. It's 3 mains and that's it. Like a handful of basically random extras. Like it's really, really small and compact and tight, but every single thing about it is so deliberate and meticulous. Like you could list off a bunch of different A24 films now, and I couldn't probably name on one hand. Like I'm trying to think of other films by A24 that I slapped a 10 out of 10 on right out the gate. And I'm struggling. Man.
Yeah, maybe this would be high up for you.
Yeah, like I'm like seriously. I mean, granted, yeah, I haven't seen as many different things as probably you have or other people have, but even still, like, yeah, 100% for me. Like this has got to be.
It's up there. It's up there for sure. Well, as always, guys, thanks for the feedback in the old comment section. Once again this week. Nick, that's it for past lives.
Jared, we didn't really answer your question. I'm sorry, but I honestly think, just to kind of circle back to that really, really quick, top 10 for sure. Top 10 for sure. I'd have to actually literally break down the list of first time films I've seen from directors and be like, okay, it's better than this. It's not better. Whatever.
Yeah, no, I agree. But it's a great question, Jared, and it's something we should circle back to.
Thank you so much, everybody, for your questions, for getting back to us. Those of you who asked actual questions.
Yeah, thanks, Brad, for nothing, as usual. That's what Nick's trying to say. All right, that's it. It's for Past Lives. Now, next week, we will be, the 2Ps will be reviewing Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, Part 1.
Reckoning.
I am keeping quiet because I have had the pleasure of seeing it. And Nick has not quite seen it yet. He's got a couple days, and he's going to go see it, and we'll discuss it next week. I'm looking forward to that.
Super excited. You know what I really need to do? And I'm not going to do it before the film because I'm seeing it Tuesday, and I don't have anywhere near enough time to do that. I really do need to go back and watch like the first 5 films in this franchise because I've never seen any of them. I've probably seen the original maybe way back when it came out because it came out eons ago. But like, loved Fallout. Loved Fallout. It was easily near the top of my films list.
Yeah, Fallout's
that
probably the
year,
best.
whenever it came out. It was absolutely incredible. No, I saw Rogue Nation too. So just the first 4.
That was also good.
But yeah, I absolutely adored that. I can't wait to see what Tom Cruise and Christopher McQuarrie dial up this time. I can only imagine like just seeing the trailers, seeing like the amazing commitment to filmmaking, and say what you will about whatever for filmmaking. Like there's a deliberate craft that they're trying to connect to, that they're trying to create with a film like this, and I really love to see it. It doesn't look like a boring, like silly superhero movie with just like giant CGI explosion fest like we see flooding the market lately. You know, it looks top form. I'm so excited to see it.
Get ready.
Super high expectations coming out of Fallout because I loved Fallout.
Buckle up. And we, on our second week together, we had a 10 out of 10 matchup, which
when's the next time that's going to happen? I want
I don't know.
I want to know. Even thinking about the schedule for the rest of the year, do you really think that's even, how rare is that going to be? I really think that's going to be a pretty rare thing, because you and I,
maybe once a year, maybe. Yeah.
You and I do not agree on much.
No, that's crazy. You know? I knew you'd like it, but I was like, maybe he'll give it like an 8 or something like that.
These kinds of films that take you out of the theater, and legitimately, I have not been able to stop thinking about it since. Films like that, they deserve a special score. They deserve a 10 out of 10 score because that filmmaker, that film specifically, has done something to you to glue itself to your soul. Yep. That's important. That's meaningful. That means something. That's why it gets 10 out of 10.
So our individual scores were 10, 2P score, 10 out of 10 Past Lives. Go see it, guys, while you have a chance in the theater. And if not, catch it on streaming when the time arrives. But we highly recommend that film, in the running for the best movie of the year as we're sitting here.
It's going to be tough. I'm trying to think of what else I've seen this year that would even come close.
Yeah, really nothing for me. I've got a couple 4.5s, but this movie just like takes over. Like I can't even remember like what else I had even. All right, Nick, I love you, man. I'll see you next week. We'll talk about Mission Impossible:
Dead Reckoning.
All right, get ready. Tom Cruise is going to do some I'll be quiet. But you already know he's going to do some crazy shit. He's going to do some crazy shit. All right, I'll see you, man. Love you.
Peace.